Over the past few weeks, Apple's new M1 Macs have been impressing not only Apple fans, but also people who've been using Windows computers for years, with the game-changing battery life being the main advantage so far. Linus Tech Tips finally gave the M1 MacBooks an in-depth review, and in their battery life test, the M1 13-inch MacBook Pro managed to get over 20 hours of battery life, while the latest Dell XPS 13 got just over 12 hours. That's an 8-hour difference. And on top of that, the M1 is actually faster, cooler, and quieter. So to everyone's surprise, Linus actually recommended both the MacBook Air and the Pro, despite his dumpster fire of an announcement video. But I don't blame him, because even I didn't expect Rosetta x86 app translation to work so incredibly well. One thing's for sure though, the M1 Macs definitely have his curiosity, but next year's M1X 16-inch MacBook Pro will have his attention. In this video, I'm gonna take a look at the leaks surrounding that upcoming 16-inch MacBook, and I'll break down the changes we should realistically expect, including the performance jump with the new M1X chip. So let's get started. From all of the leaks we've been seeing over the past few months, there are two things that we absolutely know will happen for sure. The 16-inch Pro will come with a new mini LED display, and it's gonna come with a more powerful M series Apple Silicon chip, which I personally think will be called the M1X chip. But before I get into both of those features, I wanna talk about something that we don't really know for sure just yet, and this one thing will change everything else. Way back in July, the reliable Apple analyst Ming-Chi Kuo said that the first ARM Mac would be a 13.3-inch MacBook Pro shipping before the end of the year without any sort of design changes, and he was right. Within that same investor note, he claimed that two redesigned MacBook Pros would be coming in 2021, including both a 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pro. Way later in December, he said that these two MacBook Pros will have mini LED displays, and they'll have an all-new form factor design. Now the big question is, what does all new form factor mean in reality? The current 16-inch MacBook Pro only came out in 2019 with thinner bezels. It already came with updated studio quality microphones and a new 6-speaker system. How much more could they change it? Well, Apple could go all out and drastically update the design, potentially changing the display to have rounded corners just like an iPad Pro. And that might actually make sense, since macOS Big Sur now features rounded windows. Or for example, they could change the MacBook exterior into a flat slab of metal like the iPad Pro, but that would require the body itself to get thinner, or else it's gonna look way too thick. And how could they possibly do that? Well, if you think about it, the switch to an all-in-one Apple Silicon chip means that the logic board no longer needs to be as large. Just look at the inside of the new M1 Mac Mini. The logic board is hilariously small. The power supply has been completely unchanged, and it's overkill for the M1 chip. The fan is also overkill because it rarely ever spins up. So in reality, Apple can shrink down all of those components on the 16-inch MacBook Pro, leaving much more room for everything else, including the battery pack. So realistically, Apple could and should completely redesign the form factor to take advantage of the space savings that they can get with the new chips, therefore making the body thinner. On top of that, they don't even need to keep the same 100 watt-hour battery pack because of how little power these new Apple Silicon chips take. That 100 watt-hour battery pack is 71.82% larger than the one in the 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro. And based on Linus's review, the M1 Pro got over 20 hours of battery life. So even if you factor in the higher resolution and display size of the 16-inch model, the battery life is going to be insane if Apple keeps the 100 watt-hour battery pack. Like potentially 30 hours or more of battery life. And here's something very interesting. The battery in the 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro is only 16.6% larger than the battery pack in the 13-inch MacBook Air. But somehow, it was able to get an extra 7 hours of battery life in Linus's test. So imagine how much battery life you'll get on top of the 13-inch Pro from a 71.82% larger battery in the 16-inch Pro. Now I know that there are more factors than that, so let's get into the new mini LED display. Based on testing done by Light, Science and Applications, mini LED consumes less power than OLED, and based on testing done by Notebook Check, OLED should generally consume less power than LCD, unless you're constantly viewing over 50% white on your display. So in most cases, the new mini LED display will help save battery life on the new 16-inch MacBook Pro on top of the gains from the larger battery. So realistically, Apple could easily shrink down the battery and make the 16-inch MacBook Pro thinner overall. Now, if you're not familiar with mini LED technology, let me explain how it works. For starters, it still uses an LCD panel, which is safe from the burn-in issues that come with OLED displays. The main difference is that instead of using one huge LED backlight like on an LCD display, mini LED uses hundreds or thousands of small LED backlights that can be locally controlled and completely turned off when displaying black. This leads to excellent contrast, colors, and dynamic range, similar to an OLED display. This is actually exactly how Apple's Pro Display XDR works. The only reason it's not called a mini LED display is because the LEDs aren't small enough to be technically called mini because of the huge 32-inch display size. Now, one of the other benefits of mini LED is that the entire display is actually thinner than an LCD display. Because of that, Apple could easily upgrade the webcam to a 1080p webcam, especially if they're already gonna redesign the body. Or there's even a chance that Apple could go all out and use the extra space to add Face ID. And believe it or not, 9to5Mac discovered mentions of Face ID in one of the betas of macOS Big Sur. So this could actually be happening. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the new M1X chip that'll be going into the 16-inch Pro. Way back in April, it was reported that Apple will be using a 12-core, 5nm ARM chip in a 2021 MacBook. And since the M1 has 8 cores, it totally makes sense that the M1X will be that 12-core chip that they were talking about. Basically, it's gonna have the same 4 efficiency cores, but it's gonna have double the amount of performance cores. So before I get into the performance numbers that we should expect, I wanna touch on the battery life. For the most basic and simple tasks, the 16-inch will still be using the 4 efficiency cores to run them. And for watching videos, that is actually handled by the hardware video decoders. So battery consumption won't go up at all. And that's how we could potentially see a 30-hour battery life figure. But in terms of performance tasks, we can actually calculate the performance usage based on the M1 chip's power consumption. Under full sustained load in Cinebench R23, the M1 used a total of 14.3 watts, with 13 watts used by the 4 performance cores and just 1.3 watts used by the efficiency cores. So if the 16-inch gets a 12-core M1X chip, we can double the power usage of the 4 performance cores and end up with a total of 27.3 watts under full load. And then if we compare that number to the power usage of the current Intel i9 16-inch Pro, it's almost 2 times more efficient, which is mind-blowing. But wait, it gets a whole lot better when we begin to estimate the performance of the M1X 16-inch MacBook Pro. The current M1 chip managed to get a score of 7700 in Cinebench R23, so let's try to break that score down. The 4 efficiency cores used 1.3 watts of power, which is about 10% of the power of the 4 high-performance cores. So if we take the simple route of dividing that 7700 score in Cinebench by 10, we end up with 700 of that score coming from the efficiency cores and 7,000 from the performance cores. So if we assume that the 16-inch Pro will get 8 performance cores that are not going to throttle because of efficiency and the larger cooling system, we should be getting a total score of 14,700 in Cinebench R23, which basically outperforms the 12-core Mac Pro, and that is just insane. That level of performance in a base 16-inch MacBook Pro is absolutely unheard of, and it's gonna happen while using less battery than before. And then if we take a look at the graphics side, we're expecting the M1X to come packing a 16-core GPU, so if we double the Geekbench 5 Metal score we got with the M1's 8-core GPU, we end up with around 45,000 points in metal. That means that the M1X's integrated graphics is going to outperform the absolute best 5600M graphics in the current 16-inch MacBook Pro, and if you didn't already know, that's currently an $800 upgrade option. But keep in mind that the M1X chip will be coming into the base model 16-inch MacBook Pro. So if we compare that to the base Intel model, you'll be getting almost double the graphics performance. And all of that is just looking at raw performance. If you factor in optimization and efficiency improvements from the new unified architecture, the performance is going to be absolutely insane. For example, the current M1 chip already outperforms the 12-core Mac Pro in Xcode programming. So imagine the M1X. Basically, what I'm trying to tell you is that the 16-inch M1X MacBook Pro is gonna blow people's minds. It's not only going to cause a massive wave of Windows laptop users to switch to the Mac, but it's literally going to put the entire computing industry into a panic. There's going to be a gold rush of laptop manufacturers switching to ARM-based chips. And we'll start to see announcements from Intel and AMD saying that they're working on ARM chips of their own that are going to be going into thin and light laptops. So basically, the 16-inch Pro will blow your mind. And if you're interested in spending $2,400 or more and you're willing to wait up to half a year, then I would definitely wait for the M1X Pro. If this video was helpful, go ahead and tap the like button and click the circle above to subscribe. Definitely check out one of those two videos right there. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.